English translation 585th contact. Good Friday, the 18th of April 2014, 21:40 hours.
Ah, you are already waiting. I have thought that I might even be here before you. However, be greeted, dear friend, and may you also be welcomed into my office. Actually, I have not expected you until tomorrow for the corrections work.
I do greet you as well, Edouard, my good friend, and thank you for your welcome. I am here in terrestrial space from today's evening until tomorrow's evening because I devote myself to some things which interest me. So I come to you now in order tomorrow afternoon after the corrections work to have more time at my disposal to pursue my interests. Furthermore, Florina has said to me that you have some questions which refer to earlier spoken facts, and about which I still should explain some things. We could discuss these right away at the beginning of our conversation if it suits you.
Naturally. On some questions I have also copied excerpts from earlier reports which I want to show you. On the other hand, I have, however, also still another thing, such as, for example, the matter that you have sent in the last century to terrestrial scientists. Apparatus hypnotic development impulses regarding technology in general as well as medicine and especially electronics, whereby an enormously fast development in all of these areas has occurred. Your father Svath has already in 1945, and you then also in 1975 many times forbid me to openly mention or write something about the real reason for the sending of these impulse to terrestrial scientists. Naturally, about this I have obliged, because you have indeed said to me that I would only be permitted to openly speak if Earthlings would direct questions to me regarding this. This now has occurred several times in the last 2 weeks, whereupon I then also have given the correct answer, which hopefully was not incorrect.
Your silence regarding this applies only to the time up until now, when you would be asked by some Earth humans about the reason for our actions regarding the sending of impulses to terrestrial scientists. As this is now clearly occurring, like you say, is it also the time for giving the explanation for this? Subsequently, I can now on my part explain that the entire undertaking of the impulse transmissions to many thousands of terrestrial scientists served to aid, in a very short time, the overall technological, medical, and electronic development, and to bring it to useful position for the mission. Specifically, I address the development of computer information and internet technology, which especially were aided to a great extent because they are in the present and future time of enormous meaning and absolute importance for the fulfillment of your mission. This development could, however, only occur in the New Age, because in earlier times were the possibilities for this still not given. Subsequently, then, the 6 ancient prophets could only bring the teachings orally, which, however, were extensively falsified by those able to write, according to their own interpretations, and were handed down in this way. This, if the writing of Judas Iscarioth is left aside. Therefore, then, in the New Age from 1844 in general, the technology of Earth humans, etc., had reached a certain development, and furthermore it was determined in advance by the Arahat Athersata level that the last valid mission of teaching spreading of Nocodemian should find its beginning as of the year 1937, and then we were directed by this level via the High Council to aid the medical as well as the overall technological, computer, information, and internet development on the Earth. However, in the entire development of all areas of research and knowledge, etc., an approximate equilibrium was to be created. Therefore, all forms of development must be taken into account so that not an unbalanced but a generally widespread development resulted. In accordance with the instructions of the Arahat Athersata level, our specialists, like technologists and engineers, etc., developed an apparatus which made it possible to deposit, by apparatus, specific, hypnotic impulses into certain Earth humans, like especially selected researchers and particular scientists of all areas of knowledge, as well as also the many and diverse, technologically talented, individuals of different specialist fields, in order to aid in all areas the necessary development and as a result to create the necessary technology through which your mission could spread out into the entire world. which indeed actually has occurred and also will occur in the future. The development of computer and internet systems and all of the other things connected to them stood then to be given top priority. The hypnotic sending of impulses for the development of all necessary areas of knowledge and development, therefore, was not without thought, but a precise, carefully considered action so that your teaching mission could spread out into the world. Regarding this, without our impulse-like development intervention with the Earth humans, the entire development in every respect would only very gradually advance and would have taken still several more centuries before the position would be reached which is given today. Unfortunately, have occurred from the whole matter of very accelerated development also extremely malicious, negative and bad factors, which particularly have arisen regarding atomic, rocket, drone, and other weapons in general and other technologies as well as chemistry, industrial, Earth orbit, and communications technologies, etc., through which much disaster was brought and will be brought in the future over terrestrial humanity as well as in regard to the planet itself, the entire nature and fauna and flora and the climate. The stupidity, power conduct, greed for profit, and high-handedness, egoism and religious sectarian faith delusion as well as hate, inhumanity and everywhere ruling illogic, etc., allows the understanding and reason of Earth humans to decline. Consequently, from all development and all progress in each area, enormously much disaster is caused and has even brought about the gross climate change. The stupidity of terrestrial responsible scientists, militaries and technologists as well as all of those who shamefully abuse as filthy profiteers for the sake of power and pleasure. Everything to the detriment of all human, animal, insect, and plant life and the planet as well as its resources and climate, unfortunately recognizes no limits and in no way whatsoever responsibility. With them belongs also the majority of terrestrial mankind, who just think about their own well-being and do not concern themselves about the fact that gradually, however certainly, each and everything is destroyed. Consequently, Earth humans themselves slowly but surely destroy all of their life basis, which always occurs more rapidly the faster the terrestrial population increases. The fact is, then, that the raging human overpopulation is the reason for each and every evil which already for decades results in a steadily further increase and ultimately leads to inevitable catastrophe. If not finally, everything is stopped and guided into correct courses and everything necessary is taken up and strictly implemented. The fundamental evils of all the whole matter are the overpopulation as well as the irresponsibility of all of those Earth humans, who in no way adapt themselves to the creational natural laws and guidelines, and hence they themselves create more and more destroying and destruction.
The eyes and ears and the reason of the Earthlings are unfortunately closed. But then to the next fact, which is also related to the mission. I have the following excerpt from the 530th official contact conversation from the 19th of November 2011. Do you remember the name of the man who was given the Dodecalogue after 1900, but who falsified it so completely that it was finally destroyed by the man himself?
I had already looked into this years ago and found out that the man was called Hermann Freimann and belonged to a small group called the Urgemeinde Christi, which dissolved only 4 years later in 1911.
For me, it is not understandable why such a man was given the Dodecalogue.
You might understand if I tell you that the name Urgemeinde Christi Emmanuel consisted of only 6 persons, and that this name must not be misunderstood, because Urgemeinde Christi Emmanuel was not or is not a religious sect. This small group, under the leadership of Hermann Freimann, tried to find out the real truth about Emmanuel and to spread it. He was of the opinion that the name Urgemeinde Christi Emmanuel was the correct way to spread the truth about Emmanuel. He became aware of the name Emmanuel in the Bible at Isaiah 7:14, which is also why he tried to get to the bottom of the truth. According to the New Testament, he called his small group Urgemeinde Christi Emmanuel. That was probably also the reason why the Dodecalogue was sent to him. But he falsified it beyond recognition, because he misinterpreted everything and worked his own thoughts and assumptions into it, which he compiled on the basis of the New Testament. Thus, he failed thoroughly to put into practice the transmitted transcript of the Dodecalogue, as well as his idea of clarifying that Emmanuel was not called Jesus Christ, and consequently his grouping fell apart again without any success. Unfortunately, it also became apparent to him to interpret, disaggregate, and present everything at his own discretion, as it is usually the case with many Earth humans, because they like to put themselves selfishly and with multiple interests always in the foreground with everything and everyone. It is therefore a great rarity that given explanations and transmissions, etc., are written down and reproduced exactly as literally as they are explained, transmitted, and given.
I am aware of that. Unfortunately, this selfishness has led to enormous falsifications of Scripture since time immemorial, as is still the case today and will also remain so far into the future, which many human beings do not want to understand. Now the open question, why was this man even chosen to write the Dodecalogue? For my part, I know why, but in this respect too, the question went to me as to why this was done, so that it can now also be discussed openly.
That is so correct. This man, Hermann Freimann, was chosen to write the Dodecalogue as it was transmitted to him, which unfortunately he did not do, but falsified everything at his own discretion because he was too religiously sectarian, so that the hope that he would change and carry out the preparations for the mission was dashed. His work, which was intended for him, on the one hand to record the Dodecalogue word for word according to the information of the level Arahat Atharsata, failed miserably on the other hand, of course, also the task assigned to him to do the preparatory work which was to be done in relation to your teaching and mission. However, due to his sectarianism, the whole thing failed from the very beginning, so that you yourself had to make sure to do the necessary preparatory work by your own efforts, which, however, brought you a lot of work and effort.
But for which I had help from you, as well as from Jacobus, Bernadette, Engelbert, and some others. There were some who were not faithful to the mission, but all the other FIGU members, well, without their help I could not have done it. This is and will remain the case today, because all the members who are today, also I, all of us without distinction, are comrades in arms in the mission. My personality is simply, if I may say so, the FIGU member who leads and guides the mission, but nothing more.
That is undeniably the case.
Then I have here another extract from a previous contact report.
Pleiadian Pleiadian Contact Reports, Volume 6, 231st Contact, the 18th of May, 1991, pages 453 of 454, Multi-duplicator.
So you did. Well, I assume that you also produce all metals with the multipliers, because if I remember correctly, Simyase explained to me in 1975 or 1976 that you extract the basic materials for metal production from the spheres of the planets, etc., in order to transform them, from which first of all lead would result and then all the necessary pure metals or alloys. At that time, I did not think about it any further. But in the meantime, I had the idea that you would obtain the necessary raw materials for certain metals or alloys directly through the multipliers, and then process them in cold processes to create special alloys. Maybe, I could imagine, you also get the ready-made metals and alloys directly from the multi-duplicators, which duplicate all matter in cold processes according to given atomic patterns. Of course, a multi-duplicator could also be called a cold processor, even if the Earth human being might misinterpret this, because for them, a processor is something different, namely a central part of a data processing system, which contains the calculator and the control unit. Do you perhaps call this device in your language multi-cold duplicator? The reason for my question is that some time ago the Earthlings invented so-called 3D printers and made them work. and since then they have been using them to produce all kinds of articles of daily use, etc. I have found the following interesting explanations on the internet.
3D printers.
A 3D printer is a machine called a printer by analogy that builds three-dimensional workpieces. The assembly is computer-controlled and is made from one or more liquid or solid materials according to specified masses and shapes keyed. During assembly, physical or chemical hardening or melting processes take place. Typical materials for 3D printing are plastics, synthetic resins, ceramics, and metals. 3D printing is a generative manufacturing process. 3D printing primarily refers to the manufacturing process of the original mold. Within the machine class of digital fabricators, 3D printers represent the most important subclass of additive, that is to say, accumulating building fabricators. Initially, 3D printers were used primarily for the production of prototypes and models, then for the production of workpieces of which only small quantities are required. For example, aircraft manufacturer Boeing uses 86 laser-sintered parts in the F-18 Hornet fighter jet. Some fundamental advantages over competing manufacturing processes have led and continue to lead to the increasing use of the technique also in the mass production of parts. Compared to injection molding, for example, 3D printing has the advantage that the complex production of molds and mold changing is no longer necessary. Compared to all material removing processes such as cutting, turning, drilling, 3D printing has the advantage that there is no material loss. In most cases, the process is also more energy efficient because the material is only built up once in the required size and mass. The most important techniques of 3D printing are selective laser melting and electron beam melting for metals and selective laser sintering for polymers, ceramics and metals, stereolithography and digital light processing for liquid synthetic resins and polyjet modeling, as well as fused deposition modeling for plastics and partly synthetic resins. The achievable resolution of a resin printer at the end of 2012 was, for example, 0.043 mm in X and Y direction, and 0.016 mm on the Z-axis. Multiple 3D printing. In most cases, 3D printing machines only work with one material or mixture of materials and one printing process. However, combined printing processes have already been tested on a trial basis. Scientists at Cornell University, for example, have printed a complete zinc-air battery from several materials. Printing plastics of different hardnesses and colors is now also possible simultaneously. This makes processes that previously required several manufacturing steps feasible in a single operation. For example, an object can be made impact-resistant in places with rubber-like surfaces.
Wikipedia Global as 3D printing.
3D printers for home users will be available from around $200 2013. The appropriate software is included or can be downloaded. Objects such as small toys, jewelry, or pencil cups are possible with it. However, structurally more complex, very resilient objects and perfect curves can only be produced with professional printers. Differences in performance and functions can be seen in the processing, for example. Information on speed and resolution is no guarantee of how effectively the device works with the material used and what performance the hardware is actually capable of. It is also possible to have your object printed out in a fab lab or to upload the CAD file to online services and have your product delivered to your home. 3D scanners convert any objects into data. This already works with a simple webcam and special software. Online services are also available for this purpose, which convert an object into a file using photos from various perspectives. The rules of copyright apply to 3D printing, but patents and utility models must also be observed. 3D printing and art. 3D printing is also slowly finding its way into the art world. More and more artists are working with 3D printing as a medium and using the creative possibilities for their art. Sculptors or other artists who create sculptures or three-dimensional objects always have the ulterior motive of technical feasibility. Here, 3D printing not only broadens the horizon, as even the most complex shapes are possible, but also sets completely new standards economically, as the elaborate manual work down to the last detail only has to be done on the digital object. The printer then translates the thoughts into reality. Artists like Moto Waganari or John Davidoff already use the technology to create 3D art sculptures. With art shapes, a supplier has already been found who is a contact point for artists in the field of 3D printing and marketing of 3D art. Discourse and repercussions. In parallel with the technical development and the increasing spread of 3D printing processes, a discussion has begun in the scientific community about the economic and social consequences of this development. Some researchers expect drastic changes in the economic structure. These are to be expected, for example, through the shift of production processes to consumers. Furthermore, innovation processes would be significantly accelerated. Some British scientists even see the technology as the basis for a third industrial revolution. Critics of this assumption, such as the mathematician Hartmut Schwandt of the Technical University of Berlin, argue that process and material costs are much higher in individual production than in mass production. For this reason, he considers the proclamation of a further industrial revolution to be exaggerated. The publication by Cody Wilson of Free Construction plans for the printing of a weapon in 3D on a website was criticized. The construction plans had to be removed from the website due to pressure from the U.S. Department of Defense on charges of violating arms export regulations. According to a statement by DHL, the new technologies could mean immediate changes for the transport sector. We are running through some scenarios of what the new technology could mean for us. But the fact that this will make the logistics industry redundant is certainly exaggerated. For example, we are considering how the raw materials will get to the printers. We could also position ourselves as a platform for intellectual property. But we are not yet marching in one direction or the other. The possibility of distributing and reproducing shapes digitally leads to discussions about future solutions for a copyright of 3D objects. Especially design, architecture, and art could be affected. The use of 3D printers is also being tested as an educational tool in some schools. In the UK, for example, several schools have been equipped with a 3D printer in a test program. Following the successful completion of this test phase, Michael Gove, the UK Minister of Education, is now planning to invest a further £500,000 or so to equip public schools in the UK with 3D printers. The US target is to equip all public schools with 3D printers during 2014.
I would like to add my question about this and extracts from old contact reports. This 3D printing technology, is it in any way comparable to your multi-duplicators, replicators, or whatever you want to call them, machines or devices?
No, not at all, because it corresponds to a completely different technique than our duplicators, as you call these devices. These 3D printers need various materials to produce any kind of objects, etc., so they are still a rather primitive technology, and therefore no comparison can be made with our duplicators. Our devices do not need any materials, because they're basic material for the production of all utility and other objects, as well as machines, flying apparatus and residential buildings, etc., etc. We obtain from the spheres of planets as well as directly from the space of the universe, whereby we extract the necessary substances from the inexhaustible cosmic sea of electrons and generate the necessary matter from the electrons, in order to then duplicate all conceivably necessary products from them by means of programmed templates.
I know that, because you said something in this context. I can remember it, because we talked about it on the 18th of May, 1991 at the 238th Contact Report, Pleiadian Contact Reports. Volume 6, pages 452-453. But I wanted to go into it and ask you again in connection with the 3D printer, especially whether this printer might be a first primitive forerunner of your multi-duplicators. I have the following excerpt, which I picked out and copied. Then there will be no doubt about it. I wanted to ask you something else, but it slipped my mind again. It is about the multi-duplicators. When Nocodemian built his robot armies and his android armies, he did it in a way that still seems utopian to today's Earth humans, because he built a multi-duplicator for this purpose, which reproduced everything programmed with an atomic blueprint, etc., infinitely many times in absolute uniformity. So Nocodemian only needed to construct one copy of each kind of robot, as well as of the androids, after which he could multiply them in infinite numbers by means of the multiplier. The final product resembled the prototype down to the tiniest atomic detail, which served solely as the perfect model. Actually, such a multi-duplicator is a giant apparatus that produces clones. In other words, one could also say that it is a copier or duplicator that provides an exact copy of the original, not only the outer visible part, but also the inside, down to the last and finest atomic structure. The question now is whether you also have such multi-duplicators, which are electron-based and are based on their operation with regard to the required energies, but also with regard to the required matter for the multi-duplications to be produced. If I remember correctly, then the inexhaustible cosmic seas of electrons are tapped to transform and form the necessary matter from the electrons, from which the templates programmed by atomic images then receive their material form and are materially duplicated.
This wonderful invention of Nocodemian has remained with us, even if today everything has been changed and renewed so much according to the inevitable progress that nothing indicates the origin. All necessary building materials of any kind, machines, robotic tools, androids, and also medicines and food, etc., have been produced for thousands of years in the form of multi-duplicates.
Then I have a question concerning the following extract from an old contact report, namely this one.
Pleiadian Contact Reports, Volume 8, 297th Contact, the 19th of March, 2001, page 235, Synthetic Meat.
I was just trying to confirm. Then another question. What is your attitude towards wild animals? Do you also care for them in the same way as the human beings here on Earth? Do you also go hunting? Do you also have hunters for this purpose?
Hunting is not allowed with us, and we leave the regulation of wildlife to nature and its laws. In our country, we leave the wildlife so large and in fact free enough that all animals have the freedom they need. Consequently, no animals also migrate to villages and towns, as is the case on Earth, because the animals no longer have sufficient habitat due to the enormous overpopulation of human beings. In our country, it is forbidden to enter wildlife areas in order to build recreational or residential facilities. It is also our custom, which unfortunately is not yet the case for all of the federated states, not to kill game or any other animals which are kept in parks and enclosures on a large scale and which are used for dairy farming, etc., to produce food, etc. The animal proteins required for our food are produced by means of special duplicators by producing synthetic meat, which is absolutely equivalent to real animal meat.
My question is not just about wild animals that you do not hunt, but also about all other animals and all the creatures. You are also producing meat through your multipliers, which, as I mentioned in the extract, is equivalent to animal meat. This synthetic meat, on the one hand, is it made up of animal protein and all the other substances that animal meat has? And on the other hand, is it also possible for you to synthetically generate different kinds of meat from animals and from creatures and also their meat taste?
That is, of course, the case.
Then another question on this. Do you kill any animals at all, as well as reptiles, fish, birds, and other animal creatures?
We play Yaren respect and protect all life of every genus and species, so we do not kill animals, creatures, or other living creatures for food, care, or other purposes. If, however, necessity should require it, which is practically impossible, that as a result of life support and thus for the food of human beings, living beings would have to be killed, then these would only be very low animals, etc.
This is also known to me, but I wanted to hear it from you again. But what do you define in terms of low animals and low animals?
The comparison with earthly low animals is not just any kind of animal or creature, but their size, which is estimated to correspond to a dwarf rabbit of earthly norm. However, killing is only permitted if no other food source, such as fruits, vegetables, and herbs, etc., is available.
You also keep pets, such as the Ulrak, which runs around Quetzal's compound. Quetzal also has cattle and horses, etc., which he has brought from Earth to Era, because he loves to play farmer in an earthly way, and often sits in his log cabin, which he has built in an earthly style. When he is there, in fact, I had to laugh out loud when I saw him, and he is reading old earthly newspapers. He has glasses on, but they only contain window glass.
He finds it very romantic, so he pursues this leisure activity in his leisure hours. Many of the human beings on Era, as well as in our whole Federation, also indulge in some kind of speciality which they cultivate in their leisure time.
We call it a hobby. But what comes to my mind right now, today, in the afternoon, Elizabeth Moosbrugger and Renate Stur were here, and Renate told me that there was a program on television about the fact that many things are hereditary in the temporal lobes, such as the belief in God and religious and sectarian beliefs in general, as well as attitudes, habits, illnesses and behavior, etc. We have already talked about this on several occasions. In the old contact reports, I found some of this in the 400th contact, from Saturday, the 15th of October 2005, the 420th contact, from Wednesday the 24th of May 2006, as well as the 476th contact from Tuesday the 3rd of February 2009, and the 492nd contact from Easter Monday, the 5th of April 2010. Your father Schvath also explained some things to me about this in the 1940s. But the reason why I am talking about it is because of what Renate said. Because I find it interesting that scientists have also recognized this fact and are now talking about it openly on television.
Scientific research does not stand still, and consequently, more and more important findings are being made.
But it is interesting, when our contact conversations are published, that days, weeks, months, or some years later in newspapers and magazines, as well as on radio and television, exactly those facts are taken up and documented with scientifically founded reports as research results and findings. Often, and this is not only the case for me, but also for the core group and many passive members, we are concerned with the idea that the contact reports are the trigger for certain scientific researches to be carried out, based on what is mentioned in the contact reports.
Often this is also the case because our contact reports encourage various scientific researchers and groups to get to the bottom of the facts that we openly state in our conversations. It is indeed the case that worldwide the contact reports are read by many human beings and that these are searched for special facts. It is not only the internet that plays a certain role in this, but also the fact that the contact reports are copied and distributed in this way and consequently reach authoritative scientists and researchers who then endeavor to carry out research on certain things mentioned in the contact reports and ultimately gain valuable insights from them. and this happens more often than you might imagine. In fact, our discussion reports are in this way very valuable for research and development in many different fields.
Then we are not barking up the wrong tree with our assumption. But now, once again, I have a question regarding the signal effect of homeopathic remedies and Bach flowers, etc. We have also talked about this on several occasions, but I think it is worthwhile for you to say a few words about what the signal effect of such remedies really is.
You can also explain that.
Aha! Again, but all right, if I have to, I will explain it this way. The remedies of homeopathy and the Bach flowers, as well as various other remedies and similarly directed remedies, do not have any direct signal effect, because if such a signal effect appears, then it is only mentally and emotionally caused. This can also be read in the 390th Contact from the 26th of May 2005, Volume 10, pages 81 to 83, as I have looked up. Effective effects of such substances cannot be caused by signal effects or other indirect effects, but only by a fully fledged substance. For this purpose, it is perhaps a good idea if I include an excerpt of the conversation from the 390th Contact conversation in addition to my explanation.
Pleiadian Pleiadian Contact Reports, Volume 10, 390th Contact, from the 26th of May, 2005, pages 81 to 83.
Well, on top of everything else, I do have one more question I would like to ask you. We once talked about the fact that the signal effect in homeopathy is also different from the one you mentioned in your statement. If I remember correctly, you said that the attitude of the human beings and their thoughts and feelings, as well as the psyche and consciousness, and thus the entire mental block, also played a very important role. However, this is only the case if there are only very high dilutions of the homeopathic remedies. That is to say, only if there are no more active substances in the signal carrier fluid, which is the case after only a few dilution processes. What can you say to this? Unfortunately, we discussed this outside of an official conversation, which is why nothing has been put in writing about it. I would like to add that I have tried various homeopathic remedies over weeks and months, but they have not helped me in any way with my ailments or illnesses. It was only when I obtained the pure active ingredients and applied them that I experienced improvement and healing, for example through the use of arnica, etc.
You do not get involved in imaginations and beliefs, which is also why no effect could be achieved. The signaling effect you mentioned concerning homeopathic remedies in relation to the human beings is based, as you said correctly, on the mental vibrations, energies, and forces, whereby these are fundamentally derived from the thoughts, feelings, and psyche, as well as from the consciousness, whereby the whole is called mental block. Basically, these energies and forces are based on imagination and on faith. The mental vibrations reflect and embody through the thoughts, feelings, the psyche, and the consciousness their energies and forces, which in relation to homeopathic remedies are controlled in such a way that they produce positive and therefore soothing or healing effects with regard to suffering and illness. This use of the mental vibrations as well as their energies and forces works in a similar way to consciousness healing, which is mistakenly and misunderstandably called spiritual healing, which does not exist in reality. The process of consciousness healing is based on a telepathic suggestive emission of mental vibrations, energies and forces which cause the recipient to unknowingly develop strongly self-suggestive mental vibrations, energies and forces through which self-healing is brought about. This is to say that no person capable of self-healing is able to use his own energies and powers to relieve the suffering of another human being or to heal illness. A person capable of healing consciousness is only able to send out telepathic suggestive mental vibrations, energies and powers to certain human beings, also to animals or plants, in the case of the Earth humans who are still absolutely unconscious. This causes mental vibrations, energies, and powers to be triggered by a very strong, unconscious self-suggestion through which self-healing is brought about. The process of the above-mentioned further signal effect of homeopathy now consists in the fact that the person to whom the homeopathic remedies are administered unconsciously suggestively stimulates his mental block to produce a comprehensive mental vibration with its energies and forces, whereby in this case too self-healing is triggered and realized. Such effects can also be induced at a distance with regard to a healing of consciousness. If the person capable of doing so can actually use his mental block or its vibrations, energies, and powers in this form. This is in complete contrast to the use of homeopathic remedies, where direct acute self-suggestion leads to self-healing if the homeopathic remedy does not contain any active substances, but only active substance signals, which truly only have a believing effect. And because the active ingredient signals are also retained even when an active ingredient is diluted millions of times, it is said that the healing effect is based on a signal effect. But this must be understood in the sense that it is not the signals of the homeopathic remedy itself that bring about relief or healing, but that they only have a mediating function or a belief function to the mental block, which then begins to work suggestively in such a way that very strong mental vibrations, energies, and forces are generated, through which self-healing ultimately takes place. Homeopathic medication, it must be said again, is only effective as a remedy if it is only slightly diluted, as long as the active ingredients are still present in large, verifiable quantities. With the number of dilutions, the active substances dwindle and therefore become weaker and weaker and more useless, whereby in the end only the signal effect remains, which I have already explained in its effect. The uselessness of homeopathic remedies starts with a low dilution, because basically only the pure active substance is of any use and soothing or healing in a comprehensive way. The excerpt is probably necessary to round off the whole of your short explanation.
Exactly. I also think so, because the human beings often have a short memory, which is why the same questions come up again and again, even though they have been answered in detail once or several times. But that is probably only because on the one hand, when people answer questions, they do not pay attention and do not listen correctly, and consequently, they also do not think about it consciously and in detail. On the other hand, question answers fall into oblivion because there is no real interest in asking and answering a question. Because something is only asked for the sake of asking, in order to attract the attention of the listeners. This also applies to learning in every respect, including the reading of books and writings, because if something is read only superficially or without real interest, then on the one hand it corresponds to a superficial review of something written, on the other hand it deviates completely from studying.
Your argumentation corresponds to what is real, but some persons will not like your explanation.
We have a saying, when the human being is hit on the nerve, they cry out. But I have something else we should talk about and not mince matters, namely the so-called climate conferences, which I think are absolute nonsense, a waste of money, and completely useless. Just recently it was announced that the target of what had been decided at previous climate conferences had not been achieved. But that is hardly surprising when you consider the idiocies that are being chaffed and rambled on at such conferences. Idiocies that are mentioned by the conference participants as discussions and advice, but where only junk and nonsense is decided. The main thing is that the participants are able to speak big and stupid words, to cultivate their image, and to eat and drink well and expensively. Either those responsible for climate conferences, governments, offices and authorities, as well as the researchers and scientists who are, or should be, concerned with the protection of the environment. The planet, nature, the climate, and the fauna and flora, and of course the human beings, are naive and see reality and its truth in a rose-tinted light. Or they are so hardened and unscrupulous that they do not give a damn about everything concerning diseases, epidemics, evil and destruction, etc., and the welfare of all mankind, except their own welfare, financial greed, pleasure and image, etc. In any case, the fact is that they do not really care about all the rampant problems caused by overpopulation, but only about short-sighted and poorly conceived measures which are totally abstruse, idiotic, and absolutely useless. Basically, all climate conference participants do not have enough grit in their brains to recognize and understand the causes of climate change, which is effectively climate destruction, because they close their eyes and conscience and their responsibility to reality. Reality clearly states that the causes of climate change and all the evils of all kinds that sweep across the earth and through humanity lie solely in the immense mass of overpopulation and its continued unstoppable growth. Because the conference topics have no idea what the causes of climate change are, or deliberately do not want to know what they are, or where they are to be found and that they must be prevented, there is nothing at all that would be beneficial. As a rule, they are also autocratic, and they do not care about reality and its truth, because they do not want to lose their offices and want to remain in power. In this respect, they are afraid and cowardly if they simply sweep under the carpet the fact that the existing and ever-increasing overpopulation is the cause of all the evils that exist today, evoked by the great mass of humanity and their evil, negative and terrible as well as destructive and already often fatal effects. Furthermore, it must be said that the participants of climate conferences and all other responsible persons in governments, who are directly or indirectly responsible for the protection of the environment, nature and its fauna and flora and for the climate, etc., in their stupidity and foolishness, do not realize that the measures adopted by climate conferences and governmental decrees, etc., are absolute nonsense. Indeed, if something is decided in this way, such as that the emission of environmentally destructive exhaust gases, etc., or direct or indirect pollution should be limited and reduced to old levels over a period of 20 years or so, or that less chemicals should be released, then this is nonsensically related only directly to the bad values of the present. The lack of intelligence of all those responsible is not enough to see, grasp and understand that decisions taken in the present to reduce emissions and chemicals, etc., are useless just 1 year later. This is because by then, the human beings will have grown by an average of 100 million more human beings, and this number is increasing every year, and the same number of human beings will have reached adulthood, polluting the environment with motor vehicles and chemicals and with all kinds of consumer goods, etc., which will be purchased and contribute to the depletion of the Earth's resources. It is therefore the case that if a climate protection program is adopted, which is to run for 1 or 2 decades until it is fulfilled, it can never be fulfilled. And this is because, as I said, the program can no longer be fulfilled after only 1 year, because by then 100 million more human beings will be born, and also every year thereafter. So in 10 years, 1 billion human beings, but rather tens of thousands more, will populate the Earth. This will render the resolutions of the climate conference and the governmental and other official decrees, etc., on climate and environmental protection absolutely ineffective, so that the efforts to enforce them will be nothing more and nothing less than a small drop of water on a large hot stone. This means, however, that the entire planet Earth and its nature, fauna and flora, as well as all seas, lakes, streams, rivers and other bodies of water, as well as the floodplains, meadows, forests, primeval meadows, and all fertile arable land and garden land, as well as the Earth's resources, are being exploited and destroyed in an ever more vicious manner, with the result that much of the land is falling into desertification and is becoming useless and even a deadly factor for the human beings. So everything is being done to destroy the environment, to eradicate marine life and to breed poultry, pigs, and all sorts of other animals and creatures on mass farms, which create a lot of harmful fumes and excrements, thus polluting the environment. The human need for meat of all kinds is the only reason for such factory farms, which are usually so catastrophically managed and worked that the living beings suffer infernal torture, even killing. In the case of cattle alone, which are kept for slaughter and pumped full of antibiotics, you put the number of these animals at 1.6 billion, 1,600,000,000 worldwide, to which must be added innumerable pigs, rabbits, poultry and other animals, creatures and fish and other marine life. In this context, however, there is only talk of the catastrophic mass keeping of animals and creatures, etc., which on the one hand is based on human meat requirements, but on the other hand is only done for profit. The protection of animals is only rarely called for, and consequently the conditions in mass farming are generally catastrophic with regard to feeding and treatment and the places where the animals are kept. The methane and other gases, as well as the excrements, which are produced by these masses of food animals. This food animal, as well as food poultry and the food sea dwellers, are immeasurable and damage the atmosphere, whereby the human beings inhale the exhaust gases with the air and fall ill with them. The same is also true for toxic chemicals that are swirled through the air and inhaled, causing the human beings to fall ill. Then there is globalization, which takes all kinds of animals, creatures, aquatic life, insects and reptiles, as well as seeds and plants, from foreign countries to other countries, driving away and eradicating native species and genera. But also, bacteria and viruses in relation to diseases and epidemics are carried worldwide through globalization and bring death to many of the human beings. But here too, world leaders, governments, scientists and industry are doing nothing to stop it, because they are all foolishly and stupidly earning tens of millions and billions of dollars, which they use to gain enormous power, to get into politics and to do it all in the same way, and to pocket even more money.
You yourself have already said enough about these facts, so we need not go on talking about them. Your explanations give the real facts, which is probably nothing more to say at the moment.
If you think so, then it is also fine with me. Then a question relating to the electric cigarette, which is not smoked but steamed, because it is not smoke but steam that is produced by chemical agents that are poured into the steam cigarette and evaporated by the current of a battery when the cigarette is sucked. Is the whole thing really harmless, as is claimed, or are there also poisonous and thus naturally harmful substances in this cigarette? You promised me 3 months ago that you would look into this.
I have also done that in the meantime, but the result is not pleasant for those Earth humans who use such inhalation devices. My evaluation showed that these also contain health risks, the worst of all being that of carcinogenesis, which is mainly promoted by the chemical substances acetaldehyde, crotonaldehyde, and formaldehyde. These chemical substances, which also contain nicotine, damage the lungs and blacken them, resulting in what we call nicotine lungs. In addition to the substances mentioned above, there are various others that are harmful to health and even have a negative effect on the brain. Some of these substances develop their toxic effects only through the vapor produced and partly in connection with the secretions of the mucous membranes. Although all these substances are not harmful to health to the same extent and are not as highly concentrated as in the case of tobacco smoke, which contains around 6,000 toxins or develops them by burning or incineration, they are equally harmful in the long term and in the worst case carcinogenic, not only in the lungs.
So this kind of smoking is also not recommended, I suppose.
Yes, that is indeed advisable.
Of course, no one or only a few of the addicts will listen to it, because it is well known that good advice is usually ignored. But I have another question, and it concerns credit cards, which are being used more and more. Could it be that credit cards are a way of eventually removing cash completely from official circulation? I do not mean that money is abolished and a moneyless form is created, as you have it with you. I think it is more that we are working towards a situation where money will only exist in banks, so that the human beings can be totally controlled in terms of cash, possessions, goods, and property.
You really grasp the whole thing before it is officially announced, because in fact the banks and the financial authorities of various states are secretly working towards exactly that. This is supposed to lead to the totalitarian control of Earth humans down to the smallest coin and also in terms of taxation and to their financial exploitation with more and more compulsory contributions. The whole thing is not to create a system without money, but to bring about a total control of the Earth humans with regard to their money, possessions, and assets. Such total control as well as total surveillance of the human beings is something the EU in particular is striving for.
The control chip, announced since the 1960s, which is to be implanted in every human being, which will then contain all their birth, illness, life, and social data, etc., in order to monitor them in a totalitarian way and to be able to determine to the centimeter where they are at any given moment. This is already being done to some extent with dogs and cats and other pets, and also with wild animals. Finally, there is the last horror vision of mental surveillance and control, that the human being's thoughts and feelings are also controlled, as well as their desires, needs, wishes, actions, deeds, and behavior. And if this really does come to this point, this mental control, as certain visions of the future have shown in modern times since the 1960s and even since ancient times, then the human beings will be completely robbed of their personal freedom by the rulers of governments. And indeed, for some time now, there has been much evidence that everything is evolving towards the visions. When I think of the EU, it has been carrying out dictatorial measures and methods of suppressing democracy since its inception, whereby the powers that be subject themselves to all political, social, and cultural life as a whole according to the guiding principle of all dictators, such as Hitler, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Ceausescu, etc., and regulate everything and anything by force.
It is not yet the time. But you are right that the overall development is moving in this direction in terms of totalitarian control, surveillance, and oppression of Earth humans, as ancient prophecies have shown. But now is the time again for us to discuss something in private before I have to leave.
So be it, although I also have some things I would like to discuss in private, if there is enough time. There are still some things that I really want to discuss with you, and on which I would like to hear your opinion.
That will probably be possible. Then I want to start with this regarding my matter.